Greetings sailors and welcome to my first look at the release version of the Jean Bart. I have looked at this previously, but that was while it was still work in progress. The big surprise for this is that it's actually available not only for, well, coal, as it turns out. I think a lot of people hoped it would be free XP, but instead it's 226,000 coal, which is almost as expensive as the Salem, although of course it's a tier 9 versus a tier 10, so it makes sense it would be around about that. But it's also available directly for money. You can go and buy this thing in the premium shop for £50 or your local equivalent. That's quite expensive, and I'm going to say right now, probably not worth it for most people. It does not earn like a Missouri earns. In terms of grinding for coal, though, it's a bit of a long haul, but I would say yes, it's a good ship. It is indeed a very good ship. In fact, it might be a little bit too good, at least in terms of its gunnery. So as I've covered previously, this is essentially an up-tiered Richelieu. It has the same armament, but there are some differences. Mostly it's buffs compared to what the Richelieu has, but there are one or two things that are slightly worse than the Richelieu as well. The biggest noticeable one is with the guns. As I've said, it's the same 15-inch guns, but there are some nice things going on. It's 1.9 Sigma versus 1.8, and it reloads 4 seconds faster, 26 seconds versus 30. Those two things together make the gunnery on this ship feel a lot more comfortable. It's more accurate, and it fires more often. And even just firing more often can contribute to a feeling of accuracy, because if you're firing more often, you're hitting more often, you're getting more shells in the air. And this is why slow firing ships tend to be a bit less popular. So the guns themselves are fairly dangerous. Because they're French 15-inch guns, they maintain good penetration over distance, as this Musashi will find out once I start aiming a little bit better. You've also, of course, got the main battery reload booster, which helps you kick out even more damage at certain points. And that's where this ship becomes truly dangerous. That's where this ship becomes able to punish enemies like really not a lot else in the game. If you are pulling a broadside in front of a Jean Bart and their reload booster isn't on cooldown, you can expect to get smacked around fairly hard. You can still expect to get smacked around without it, of course, as you would with potentially any other battleship in the game, but because it's got that extra accuracy, the faster reload, and the main battery reload booster on top of that, this is not a ship to do silly things in front of. This is a ship where if you try and pull a broadside, you will get punished. The fact that it's got that 26 boosted reload, I mean, that already sounds good in of itself, but you can actually, of course, this being a tier 9 ship, put on a module that can decrease that at the expense of extra turret traverse. But because the turret traverse is as good as the Richelieu, 36 seconds, well, you get expert marksman on your captain, and you really won't notice the extra difference, essentially. You can get your reload as of standard down to about 22.5 seconds, more or less. Once you get adrenaline rush on top of that as well, things get even more spicy. That Jervis, by the way, pay attention to the amount of health they have left. That Jervis is going to be extremely relevant to the outcome of this match, as is the fact that neither of these cruisers is firing at them. Anyway, enough foreshadowing. There are some other differences as well. It has more secondary guns. It's got twice the number of 100mm secondaries. It's also got much better anti-air. It is very good in its anti-air capabilities. We're sort of talking... Actually, I haven't compared the DPS numbers, but it feels as good as the Iowa. It might even be better than the Iowa. I'm not sure. It's got a whole bunch of mid-range, as the Richelieu does, but the long range is significantly better. Because it's got these good secondaries and the good anti-air, you can basically have a captain spec'd to either, and you can have the ship spec'd to either, and it will do very well either way. I hadn't done either with this. This was more of a general survivability spec captain, so there's nothing special going on with either the AA or the secondaries in terms of range or damage output. But yeah, if you get into a carrier game and this thing is fully spec'd for AA, don't take your planes near it, because they'll have difficulties. The concealment, as the last thing that is superior to the Richelieu, is about 300 metres better. So not a huge amount, but you know, it's a little bit over what the Richelieu has. The Richelieu already has good stealth for its tier, so it's, I think, 12.3 kilometres on this. If somebody holds fire, waits until they get close enough, catches you in a broadside, and unleashes everything they've got with the main battery reload, you are so screwed at that kind of range. You absolutely don't want to be that close to a Jean Bart that is giving you everything it's got. Well, I missed a thing actually. It's got slightly better hit points. It's the same hit points as a stock Alsace, so it's not particularly good in terms of hit points for its tier, but it is a step up from what the Richelieu has, at least, anyway. There are two things that I noted that are worse. There might be one or two things I've missed out of this comparison with the Richelieu. I think I've hit all the main points. There might be one or two minor things. It's slightly slower, 30 knots versus 32, and the main battery range is actually less by 800 metres, give or take. 24.5 versus 25.3. 24.5 is still more than good enough. It absolutely is. You do not need to take anything to extend the range of your main battery on this ship. It would be a bit of a waste of a equipment slot. So it's good. It's very, very good. But mostly it's really good when it's punishing people doing silly things like giving you broadsides, as that Musashi has done twice now. I would actually go so far as to say it's one of the best ships in the game when it comes to that. The fact that it's 15-inch guns, though, means that angling battleships you're not going to do as much damage with. You need to aim for the superstructure, really. But you can still punish cruisers quite hard. So that accuracy plus that reload plus the main battery reload booster, it makes it second to none in terms of punishing people doing silly things. And you'll see some of that in this game. We kind of lost this one already, by the way, but you'll see some of what I mean. And that's the part where maybe it's a little bit overpowered. Because in a cruiser, you don't even necessarily need to be doing massively wrong things to get punished by battleship guns. It was previously even worse because it had the main battery reload booster being even more powerful, but they did tone that down. So although it's still reasonably potent, we actually see it in use here against the rune, but the rune is somewhat angled, and also the rune, well, they're unangling a bit now, but the armour scheme of the rune means they're less susceptible to citadels, especially at this range. And so I'm doing some damage, but this isn't going to punish them in the same way as it would other cruisers. So certain cruisers can get away with this, but generally speaking, you don't want to do that. Well, you don't want to do that in front of a battleship full stop, but you especially don't want to do that in front of this battleship. Once the Begonia turns up, that'll be exactly the same. While this is all going to pot, it's probably a good moment to talk a little more about my feelings on Wargaming's decision to actually sell this. Because it's the first tier 9 in any of their titles that you've been able to pay money for directly and buy. Because it's a premium ship, it is a premium ship. Warships was already different in the fact that it had tier 9 premiums. There are tier 9 reward vehicles in World of Tanks, but there's nothing that earns as a premium ship does. But of course, up until now, they've been free XP ships. It's already different in that it's a premium coal ship. That's a new thing. The only other coal ships we've had so far have been reward ships, essentially. But the fact that you can buy it directly for money, well, I have a little bit of a mixed feeling on the subject. I will say, for Wargaming's part, they've been very upfront about the fact that this, for them, is an experiment. They're basically trying it out to see what the market will bear, basically, to see what kind of sales they get, to see Also, what kind of public reaction they get, that will be a part of it. The downside is, of course, you've got people... yeah, don't do that, Neptune. That was a bad move. I know you were trying to torpedo me, but anyway. The downside is that you've got people who can walk into buying a high-tier premium, and even higher than tier 8 premium, having never played a single battle before, which isn't necessarily going to be a good gameplay experience for them, and is certainly not going to be a good gameplay experience for any of their teammates, because they're not going to have a clue. From Wargaming's point of view, though, and this is again something they've explicitly stated, there's a very high probability that somebody having invested that amount of money in the game will then stick around and actually try and play it somewhat. It's just the rest of us, the players, that have to put up with somebody derping around in a high tier premium. That's not anything new though, that's already possible. It's just the fact that it's a tier 9 versus a tier 8. So I don't see it as being particularly game-breaking in that regard, just that it's stepping up a tier. Again, by the way, somebody doing a silly thing in front of a Jean Bart and getting punished for it. This is where this ship excels. So the upside is that you have to, that you don't have to spend a heck ton of time grinding something. In this case, coal. And I think, honestly, the fact that they've made it coal rather than free XP might be the more controversial decision here. Because far more people are going to have free XP saved up in anticipation of free XP ships coming out than will have lots of coal saved up. I think I'm sitting on less than half the amount of coal required to buy this. And I had a vague notion of buying the Salem at some point, but I've also used it to buy various legendary modules. Or the, not legendary, the upgraded ones for smoke and speed boosts and so forth, because those are also very, very useful pieces of equipment. So, although I have 1 million free XP waiting to be spent on something, I'm probably just going to keep hanging on to it. But of course, this doesn't mean that there aren't more free XP ships coming out. The Alaska seems very likely to be free XP. This might be one of the reasons why they decided to make this coal, is to make use of one of the other currencies they have in the game, and to give people more reason to grind for resources, to join clans even, because if you join a clan, of course, your clan facilities give you access to things that increase your coal intake. And there's also stuff like ranked sprint, where if you get to rank 1 you get a big chunk of coal out of it, although not that much. So there's definitely an experimental element in all of this. And as I said at the start, in terms of grinding out the coal, yeah, this is worth it. This is a good ship. This is a good end goal to have your eye on for saving up a huge pile of coal for. In terms of spending quite a lot of money on, though, I mean, tier 8 premiums are expensive, so this was always going to be more expensive if they were going to put it directly on sale, but we're getting into the realms of sort of silly money for what are purely digital goods. I always try and think of it, however, in terms of just any in-game purchase in a free-to-play game. Not even going to talk about in-game purchases you can make in, non-free-to-play games. That's a whole other kettle of fish. But in free-to-play games especially, for me, it's always been a matter of how much time I'm putting into it, how much enjoyment I'm getting out of it. And so it might well be worth that, somebody who's played this game a lot and has the money to be able to afford it decides that absolutely it's worth skipping all that time spent grinding. But just as a starting price point, it's really expensive for a single premium ship. Especially when we've got games at the moment coming out like Red Dead Redemption, and got Fallout 76 is right around the corner, and there's probably other good stuff that's been released recently as well. So yeah, I don't know. I just personally have the feeling it's not worth that amount of money. But it's certainly worth saving up your coal for. That was a fairly good round in terms of score, by the way. I think that was a little unwinnable with how it worked out. There just wasn't sufficient teamwork going on. But for that amount of damage done and that amount of XP, you can get some sense of the kind of profit you can make on a good game. And that wasn't even with lots and lots of credit flags and lots of, well, not lots of credit camos, because you can only have one camo on at a time, of course, but with its standard premium camo bonuses. But of course you can get camos that actually give you a bigger bonus than that as well. So you could, theoretically, with a really good round, make Missouri levels of money. But you're not going to be making consistently Missouri levels of money. I can foresee, though, breaching the 1,000,000 credit mark with a really good round in the Jean Bart with the appropriate flags and maybe a camo. I should also note, actually, compared to the Musashi, this is a far more fun ship to play. I think this is going to be much more to people's taste. The all-forward turret arrangements can be a little quirky sometimes, you know, getting used to that. And in fact, in this game, I'm going to spend a lot of time, comparatively speaking anyway, just kind of sat stationary and bow tanking, which you can do to some extent. But, of course, at this tier, that's going to get you burned down sooner rather than later, and when you're facing things like Yamato guns and Musashi guns, they will just lol pen you anyway. That's not to everyone's taste, that kind of playstyle, but sometimes you have to do that. And it's certainly not to my taste. But then, to be fair, you can spend an awful lot of time doing that in the Musashi as well. This here, by the way, in terms of timing at least, is a little bit of a suboptimal use of the reload booster. But as it's the first one I've used in this match, and as the Yamato was at that point giving me a broadside, yeah, I decided to trigger it. Most of the time you want to wait until after you've just fired a shot and then trigger it to get the best use out of it. Little White Mouse actually had quite a handy chart on her preview/review of this that tells you exactly when to use it. Or at least she did for the... No, I'm thinking of Le Terrible, but I'm certain she'll have done the same for this ship, because of course Le Terrible has a reload booster as well. This game, by the way, I should talk a little bit about it. I've chopped quite a big chunk out of the first half or so, because not a lot was happening. It was a very static sort of game, but it's a standard game at high tiers, and so that tends to happen. Now that we're around the 8-minute mark, though, as you can see, basically the entire surviving team, and we've only lost a couple of ships, they've lost a couple of ships, they're all over on this flank. But there are some enemy ships over on the other flank. That side of the cap circle is looking awfully open right now. And so I'm starting to move my way over there, but fortunately for me, it's not just going to be me that realises this. That Shimakaze getting knocked out was also very useful as well. That's another area where maybe you could say this is a little bit on the OP side compared to other battleships of its tier, because it has that accuracy, because it has that reload. It is therefore that much more dangerous to things like destroyers. You can't rely on them missing you with RNG so much, because the groupings are a bit tighter, the reload is good, and potentially they've got the main reload booster to throw at you. I'm taking a heck of a risk here myself, by the way. I need to turn around to get to the cap. And instead of doing the sensible thing and trying to stealth up, which I probably could have done actually if I'd just stopped firing for long enough, instead I made a risky turn whilst there was a Musashi with their guns pointed at me, and the Bismarck as well. And hell, either the other Yamato, or, well actually yeah, it must have been the Yamato with the trajectory of those shots, but that Republique is well within gun range also. So in retrospect, that wasn't the best way to do that turn. I should have tried to stealth up first, and I probably could have managed it. There's still the possibility of maybe getting air spotted while I was mid-turn, but it would have been the much more sensible thing to do. So over 90k, approaching 100k, this isn't going to be as much damage as last time. This is more of an average feeling game, but there was also much better teamwork in this game, crucially, compared to the last one. The last couple of players that were left with me in that previous match didn't prove to be so useful. The Seattle in particular, I was hoping would steam in, use their radar, we'd kill the Jervis in time to then turn around and do something about the Gunnery now. But even then, even if they had been able to do something, I don't know. Maybe they blew all their radars early. I don't know. But yeah, we were probably too far behind on points at that stage, given the cap situation. Anyway, so there is indeed an enemy destroyer in our cap. And our carrier's done a bit of damage keeping them spotted, although they're now smoking up, so they're going to be invisible for a little bit. One of our own destroyers has come back as well, though. And some of the battleships are now also taking an interest, although we've still got our Yamatos pressing north, now that the way is clear for them, essentially. Because the enemy team's more split apart than we are. I mean, we've kind of split into two halves ourselves, but this is now looking better for us than it is the enemy team. We're actually now ahead on both kills and points as well. So if we hadn't reacted to what was going on with the cap circle, this could potentially have been a bit of a bad situation for us. But as enough of us have reacted, we can actually do something about it. This is me having a go with the HE, by the way. I could even potentially have tried the reload booster here, because I've still got 3 of them left. But I decided not to in this case, because you never know when you might need it. You know, yes, I've got 3 of them left, but then if I trigger it now, I might have the cooldown to contend with when suddenly I've got a nice broadside on the Republic. So I kind of had that in mind. You can do that, though, as a not a measure of desperation, but as a, you know, if you've got some spare and you've got a bow on battleship that you just can't do much to with your 15-inch AP shells, then you can just use the reload booster and kick out a bunch of HE salvos against them. It does leave you rather in the hands of RNGs, though. The HE is nothing special on this. It's the exact same shells as the Richelieu has. So it's possible that it can work, that you'll set some fires, although you're not going to do huge amounts of damage just with the shells themselves. But generally speaking, I found I had far more luck with the AP, or I found the AP far more effective. I'm taking a bit of a hammering here, by the way. Lots of HE spam from both the Fletcher and, well, for a while there, the Worcester, so starting to run down on health a bit. And that is something you'll notice with your hit point pool. It's better than a tier 8, but most of the tier 9s are better off than you. I think the Lion might have worse. Of course, the Lion gets that heal. So the Republic has pulled into open view, but they're not quite giving me enough broadside for this to be a reliable shot of getting lots of damage. And there's still going to be those times when, even with the reload booster, RNGs just fails you. You know, they're still battleship guns after all. But over the course of a battle, it is noticeable, very noticeable, how much more accurate this feels than a Richelieu. Both from the actual accuracy and the increased rate of fire. Because that does contribute, as I said, to an increased feeling of accuracy. Or have I said that this time around? This is not my first attempt recording it. It's one of those days. In fact, my very first attempt, I talked for about 16 minutes, had to take a quick break for a glass of water, and then realised that Audacity, for some reason, had flipped audio input and wasn't recording from the microphone at all. At which point I went off in a bit of a huff. But no, this attempt is going much more successfully. And this game is going much more successfully than the previous one as well, because we've basically won at this stage. We're pushing towards this Fletcher. I've avoided taking any torp hits, although I could have survived one. Taking one on the belt would not have been fatal for me. And even if I had gone down, the North Carolina's still here. There's still other ships around, so it would not have been that big of an issue. Our Yue Yang could be a little more aggressive at this point, though. He's never going to have better backup than this basically. He doesn't have planes harassing him. We know the Fletcher's torps are on reload. He's got 2 scary battleships backing him up. So they did go in at the point where I actually asked them to go in. I think they were hanging around waiting for radar. But there really wasn't any point. That was just being a bit overly cautious at this stage. So there's that Musashi, who falls to North Carolina's guns, sadly, so no extra bit of damage there. But there is still a carrier around. 122k is not bad. It's definitely not bad. But if I can get a bit more damage, that'll be so much the better. However, let's not let this Fletcher get away, and we do have planes spotting them, so they're not going to be unspotted for long. And I think I did manage an overpen there. If my secondaries get in, that'd be nice, but no, it's the Yamato that gets him with the main battery. Because I've got the reload booster now available, and you can see this is me actually waiting until my reload is ready before I trigger it, then I've got a good chance here of gobbling up a fair bit of this mid-ways damage. And indeed, that very first salvo got me my Confederate medal for this game. I did say gobbling damage there, didn't I? I meant health. I do that. I get health and damage mixed up sometimes. Well done, brain. So if I'm lucky, I might even get the kill. And yes, there we go, with a Citadel on a low health ship, because those are the rules. And again, a couple of medals, not quite as many as last time, which was a bit ridiculous. In fact, the last game was ridiculous because I kind of got them all at once, more or less. But that's still a decent amount of damage done, and a decent amount of XP. Not top of the team, but towards the top of the team. So together with my teammates, we were able to unpick that, and it turned into quite a nice win. Although, I have to say, it's games like that where they tend to be very static. Especially standard games. It's not so bad in domination mode, but standard games, it's one of the things that puts me off high tiers. So with that result, not as good a credit income as last time, but still almost 600,000 credits from a win. That's not too shabby at all. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of credit income, there's nothing to complain about with this ship. And I think it actually does better than the Musashi, just because you can do damage more consistently than the Musashi. So is this a good ship? Yes. Is it a bit too good? Maybe. I don't know if I'm convinced. I don't know if I've convinced myself, really. I think this might be one where we have to wait and see how it does a bit. But my gut feeling is that if it's too good, it's not that too good, which obviously was an excellently constructed sentence. What I've tried to get across is that this ship is extremely punishing to be on the wrong end of if you are doing something silly. Of course, it is entirely possible that you might be pulling a turn and get shot by one of these from 20 kilometers away, but that's possible just in any ship in any high tier game, pretty much. There are a lot of maps where you do get these clear lanes of fire for quite long distances. And my personal feeling is that most people are going to be less inclined to use the reload booster at those longer ranges, that they will save it for the more close range, reliable shots, because that's really when you're going to get the best use out of it. That's when it's really going to kick out that extra damage for you. And that's where you can least afford to pull a broadside in front of these guns, because that's where you really will get punished. If you're angling sufficiently, then you should do okay. But if you're not, well, you've seen firsthand here what can happen. So, our first Tier 9 premium that you can go and buy for cash. And it's quite good. Certainly better than the other French premium we've had recently, and I suspect it will be a heck of a lot more popular than said other French premium. But maybe it's got its own balance issues in its own way. I don't know. Time will tell on this one, I think. Wargaming will be keeping eyes on the stats, and, you know, I'll be keeping an eye on my stats versus my other tier 9 battleships as well. Because sometimes just having that faster rate of fire, as with, say, the King George V, even if you've got smaller guns for your tier, that can be enough to make all the difference. And I think that's what might make the difference with this ship. That's it for this first look. Hopefully you found it useful, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down under the video, and, of course, as always, stay tuned for more.